So what I aim to do in these 20 minutes, hopefully, is to introduce you to how the spatial planning framework in Montenegro is right now and how we got there, looking back at the last 10 or so years. But at the beginning, just some context. So Montenegro is a small country, small former Yugoslavian country, right? Area of around 13,800 square kilometers, just a bit more than 500,000 in population. These three distinct regions divided in 23 municipalities. When we talk about regions, we talk about northern, which is traditionally underdeveloped, then the central region and the southern region on the coast of Adriatic Sea, which is also the most developed, the richest part of the country. About the brief history of spatial planning in Montenegro. So the first plans were made in the 18th century in this coastal region, which was also the most connected and the most developed at that time as well. But for a very long time, it was a very rural country. As we see in the research done in 20th century, urbanization coefficient in 1921 was only 6.5%. But industrialization and urbanization were rapid after the Second World War, and then, of course, there was a huge need for spatial plans. First comprehensive plans were made in 1969, which was the regional spatial plan of South Adriatic, and then in 1972, regional spatial plan of Northern Montenegro. And with these plans, the whole picture was complete, sort of. But this was happening, of course, in Yugoslavian context, in that legislative framework and with nascent expertise that was being developed at the time after the Second World War. The spatial plan of the Federal Republic of Montenegro, which was adopted in 1986, was laying out the spatial development vision until the year 2000. It was amended twice after the breakup of Yugoslavia, and significant research has been done during that process, which was then basis for the plans that were being made after that. Also, most of the municipal spatial plans and general urban plans were completed during this period. After Montenegro was declared independent in 2006, a new spatial plan of Montenegro was adopted in 2008 to be valid until 2020. So now it has expired and the new plan has still not been adopted. We'll talk about that later. But during the adoption of this spatial plan of Montenegro, adopted in 2008, some problems encountered in the process and then accounted for by researchers who were looking at this process were a lack of reliable data, lack of communication and coordination among the actors in the planning process, lack of institutional organizing in the area of spatial planning, inadequately regulated relations between public and private interests, and imprecise definitions for the concept of public good. Where does public stop or start, and how does that intervene with the private, which were, let's say, problems that were expected, having in mind recent developments in Montenegrin history. So the structural defects of the entire planning process are, as according to Doderović and Ivanović, and I tend to agree, rooted in the lack of planning tradition, longer planning tradition, and definitely in a lack of regional coordination, which does have some repercussions for later, and we'll also get back to that. The legal framework according to which the plans are adopted has been changed frequently, and the law on spatial planning and development in 1995 was succeeded by the law of the same name in 2005, which was then swiftly changed again to the law of spatial planning and construction of 2008, and then again less than 10 years later with a law that made very big and sweeping changes in 2017. And especially between these two, so 2008 and 2017, we can really follow closely how the process of spatial planning in Montenegro was gradually and then swiftly centralized. And this is what I'll be talking about in the remaining of my presentation. So let's take a closer look at the law of 2008. In this law, the traditional hierarchical structure between the municipal and the state level planning documents was preserved. And what am I talking about here is what we heard about from the colleagues now in Croatia and in Slovenia. So basically we have local level plans and central level plans and separate local and central level procedures for adopting these documents. And just to kind of enumerate what these planning documents are, so according to the law of 2008, and of course this is based on the tradition that existed in Montenegro up to this point, we have the Spatial Plan of Montenegro, which is a strategic document determining the basis of spatial organization and the instruments of spatial development. Then we have a special purpose spatial plan, which is regulating the areas of special interests, such as national parks, coastal zone. Then the detailed spatial plan for the areas in which the construction of objects of state interest or regional significance is necessary, and the state site study. And this is for the areas which are in the scope of the special purpose spatial plan. So again, coast, national park, but require more detailed elaboration. And then for the local level planning documents, there is a structure that sort of mirrors this one. So we have a local spatial urban plan that is also strategic, but on the local level, determines the goals of spatial and urban development. Then the detailed urban plan, and this is the plan of implementation. The urban project for complex construction in smaller areas or for the areas with distinguishing features. And the local site study, which is for the areas within the scope of a local spatial urban plan where detailed urban plan or urban projects are not required. So this is what the instruments were before the changes that came later. And here you can see a scheme showing how these plans were adopted. So there was a separate procedure for the local level plans, for the state level plans, and I will not take you through this sort of complex scheme, but I like how we saw different versions of this scheme, in the presentations before. But I want just to draw your attention to this. The role of local government here is very pronounced. So basically, for the local level, the local government does almost everything and just kind of notifies the ministry, that is the central government, and the government kind of takes notice of what's happening at the local level and just kind of has this consultative and the role in which it approves and makes sure that the local level plans are in accordance with the higher ranking plans, so that everything is kind of harmonized between the local level and the national level. So the fact that local spatial decisions were left to municipal authorities also meant that the municipal authorities needed some support. So there is a record of the Union of Municipalities of Montenegro from 2009, so a year after the law was adopted, where the Union of Municipalities was reviewing the problems in the application of this law and complaining about the procedures for adopting new and changing the existing spatial plans, saying that this procedure is too difficult and it should be simplified, then pointing to disparities between the plans at the local and the central level and the inconsistencies in the plans of neighboring municipalities. So we go back to this non-existence of regional level, and then there is no really way to deal with this productively, how to kind of level different municipalities, neighboring municipalities. Then we have a lack of local capacities to produce spatial plans, which has been a problem throughout this whole period. And then a lack of local expertise for the proper online presentation of planning documents, which is also now prescribed by law with the advancement in technology. Also, we heard a lot about that in the previous presentations today. They were also complaining about insufficient time, which is only 1 year, for the municipalities to adapt to the demands of this spatial planning legislation transition. Basically, the law wanted all the local governments to adopt spatial plans within this period of 1 year. And the propositions at the time were to establish a clear hierarchy of the planning documents along with the procedure for their harmonization, which would kind of tackle this problem of regional incongruities. Then exploring the possibility of introducing regional level plans, increasing the state support in strengthening the local technical capacities, and improving the process of public participation in the spatial planning procedures, because the planning, this especially was significant in the sense that I will go back to the scheme for a second to just show how we see here that after the public debate, and this is also prescribed by law, if the new document after the public debate significantly differs from what was on the table before the debate, it should then go back to another cycle of public debates. And here, the municipalities were complaining that it's not clear what does it mean to have a significant difference before and after, and basically leaving too much leeway for sort of arbitrary decisions about what should be debated again by the public and what can just go in a procedure and continue normally. And also the final requirement was to provide more time to implement the law. So I wanted to show you this because it kind of shows what were some concerns of the local level governments during the time of introducing and implementing this law of 2008, because it's also going to be important for the situation that we have right now. Strengthening the local capacities, it seems, was not the prime objective of central government, and we see repeatedly that the focus was how to improve the business environment, and that is to make the process of obtaining building permits simpler and more affordable. To do this, there was a project that lasted for 5 years and supported by the World Bank, the project called Land Administration and Management Project, and it supported the local governments in their efforts to improve the efficiency of permitting and property registration. This is basically what was, the requirements of the local governments were translated into this. Okay, we have these business barriers. So basically, we do not have problems with spatial planning. We have problems with the efficacy of permitting, of building permits and property registration. So this is why we need to create local level plans to make it more easy to build. Through the LAMP project, 9 spatial plans and 22 detailed urban plans were adopted in less developed municipalities, mostly in the northern region and Cetinje of the central region. 9 out of 22, it was a big undertaking, and significant planning documentation was adopted through this. But still, the state government reserved the right to adopt a local spatial plan if it was not adopted by the municipality, or if the lack of such document could cause damage to the environment or stagnation of local development. Again, this is debatable. Who decides what is the danger of damage to the environment or stagnation of local development? But important thing is that we have here the state government reserving the right to do a local planning documentation if it's not being done by the local government. So between the period of 2008 and 2017, while this law was in force, it was amended 7 times. Some of these corrections were just technical, but big changes and amendments resulted in changes in how municipalities are compensated for the utilities provision on construction land, streamlining the procedure of issuing building permits and broadening the state government's authority in this area. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Lowering the minimal amount of fines for violations against the law of spatial planning and construction, and enabling the private investors to initiate and finance the creation of new spatial plans and to propose changes to the existing plans. So the effect of all of this was a more centralized process of spatial planning, and now it was really primarily oriented towards eliminating regulations perceived as business barriers in construction sector. For some reason, I can't.
Maybe you just need to use the mouse to activate the right window.
I'm trying, but it's not happening. So let me just try to escape it. For some reason, I cannot. Yeah, I've been using the mouse all time. Maybe my computer is. Niksha, can you make the share stop so maybe I can start again? It's just that it looks like the computer is frozen. Yeah. Just. Okay. I'm going to try again. So sorry for this.
No problem.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes technology betrays us. Okay. It's gonna, yeah, we can continue, sorry, thank you. So just to explain on a case study of building permits, just to explain a little bit what was happening here. According to the law, when the law was first adopted, local government oversaw issuing building permits for the projects constructed in accordance with the local level planning documents. And there were only a few exceptions, such as industrial and infrastructural projects, stadiums, etc. However, this list was gradually expanded through the amendments. And first, central government got authority to issue building permits for all what was called state projects of public interest. And these were now production systems employing more than 300 workers, five-star hotels, education, science, health centers, etc. And also for smaller hotels with a surface area of more than 1,000 meters square. Then in the next amendments, this definition was expanded again, now to include facilities to produce electricity from renewable sources. And with this, I hope will ring a bell, like small hydropower plants that started expanding in the region. Also now this included small and boutique hotels. And finally, the amendments of 2014 gave the central government the authority to issue building permits for objects which are part of what was called spatial and functional whole with state projects of public interest. So what happens is that when a certain authority has the authority to issue building permit, they make kind of their own understanding of the spatial planning documents, and they make it permanent by allowing certain constructions. So taking this power away from the local level might jeopardize the municipal level governance. On the business side of things, 2013 amendments declared the investors who finance the state project of public interest do not have to pay, are not paying the municipal fees for utilities provision in construction land. To make it clear how important this is, the union municipalities in 2013 reported that for the period of 2008 to 2012, the fees, these kind of fees accounted for 31 to 43% of total municipal budgets, which is the average for the entire Montenegro. So this is, of course, very high, and it is worrisome, and it points to different problems of Montenegrin economic and spatial development. But it is also evident what impact the expanding definition of state projects has on local governments. So the more state projects are being built, the less money is coming into the local budget. And at the same time, local governments were given, by one of these amendments, the power to decide on lowering the fees for utilities provision on construction land or waiving them entirely on case-by-case basis. And this left the coastal municipalities especially vulnerable to the pressures from the outside investors who wanted to build on Montenegrin coast. And this was recognized as a potential problem and potentially corruptive mechanism, and it was challenged before the Constitutional Court of Montenegro, which had certain repercussions later. So apart from this, with some of these amendments, also the law gave much more space to the businesses to fund the change of the planning documents at the and not just on the local level. So now the Union of Municipalities requested that this becomes possible, but for the level of urban project. And then it became allowed not only for urban project, which, as we said, is a local level plan, but also for detailed spatial plan and state site study, which are central level planning documents, and also for detailed urban plan, urban project, and local site study. All of these planning documents were now made possible to be developed according to, actually their development to be initiated by the businesses who have certain property rights and who would like to change or adapt new documents in order to develop something on this land. So this also gave more space for private bureaus to do the work because more and more of them started being registered, and because there was not enough was being developed institutionally to kind of support development of spatial plans. So the private bureaus, commercial planning bureaus started having a much larger role. The Union of Municipalities again warned about the difficulties caused in the local planning process by the lack of public planning agencies, but these didn't have impact in the development of the process. And overall, the result of implementing this law and its amendments was the increased influence of private capital on spatial planning processes, the centralization of decision-making, and the insufficient development of local planning capacities. And then we get to the law of 2017, which made a big splash, so to say, because it kind of did away with the structure that we were relying upon up to this point. So according to this law, there are no municipal spatial plans. There is only spatial plan and general regulatory plan, whereas the spatial plan of Montenegro is a strategic document adopted for a period of 20 years and provides a basis for spatial planning and prescribes the guidelines for the development of the general regulatory plan. And then this regulatory plan, adopted for a period of 10 years, is a detailed planning document, so the implementation document, and contains goals and measures of spatial and urban development and covers the entire territory, including protected areas such as national parks and the sea coast. These plans are being made by the ministry, and the reasoning behind this and the kind of argumentation was that this should fix what was being termed over planning. The ministry insisted that there are too many plans in Montenegro on too many levels, and they need to be harmonized, and they need to be done by the central government, who has the complete overview and who is able to do this in an efficient manner. And also, of course, to remove business barriers, which kind of becomes a constant now in our talk here. This, unsurprisingly, caused a huge uproar. There was a lot of opposition from the local governments, from planning associations, NGOs, and maybe surprisingly, this was not a partisan issue. It might be familiar to you from your own contexts as well, that often what is proposed by the government is supported by those who support the party that's in control of the government. Here, that was not the case. The local governments, even when they were politically aligned with the central government, were really fighting and arguing against this because they were aware that this is going to take away from them important planning instruments. And this is especially now starting, I think, when we have these first few presentations talking about how important regional and local level planning documents and instruments are for the functioning of their own systems of planning. The debate was fierce, 750 comments and questions. From your context, maybe that's not so much, but for Montenegrin context, that's really a lot, having in mind how small the country is and the professional population invested in this kind of debate. Final report was a big book, let's say, but still no substantial changes came out of this. Basically, some comments were accepted, but only sort of technical issues. So the big idea was not changed by the public participation in this process. The law introduced two actors into the procedure that have not been there before. One is the Authority for Technical Requirements, which is an institution or a company in charge of certain infrastructural element. So sort of like a road construction or maintenance, water supply, so kind of a technical, someone in charge of technical side of things. And the revision council, which is appointed by the state government and should have a member of the local municipality, that is someone representing the local municipality for the municipality whose territory is being planned by the document. So this is sort of a way or an attempt to ensure the participation of local government, because, and you can see in these schemes now, the procedure has been changed a lot. So now we have here, also it is quite complicated, but what is important, and if you remember how much of this kind of things to do were on the side of the local government, so on the right side in my previous scheme, and now we see that actually it's much more structured towards the side of the ministry. And here we have, so the ministry basically doing everything and just getting bits and pieces from everyone else. And we see that also like there is a lot to be done by the Authority for Technical Requirements and by this revision council. Whereas when we look at the local government, basically the local government is only being notified and it just gives an opinion. So whenever local government is included, it gives an opinion. It doesn't really have the power to veto something or to change something for real. It's just being consulted. In addition to changing this process in this way, the law altered several other aspects of spatial development, and these are some of the most important. The building permits were abandoned as an instrument of controlling construction process. So we don't have building permits anymore. What we now have is a notification of the start of construction, which is presented to the ministry. Basically, whoever wants to construct something has a set of documents that they need to comply, and they present that to the ministry and they start building, and that's basically it. Urban and construction inspection were centralized under the ministry. It's not written here, but I can tell you that this has been a huge issue, because even though this law was adopted in 2017, so almost 4 years later, the ministry is still not able to actually staff properly this service. They actually need 70 inspectors, they say, and they only work with 20. They can't find enough people, and they cannot cover the entire territory. And in our work, and I can talk about that later if you want me to, we really encounter this, and we have experience with this, where we can see that the urban and construction inspection just cannot cover what's happening in space, cannot control it, and as a result, we have some very, very big problems in terms of illegal construction and in terms of breaking the plans, the law. It is very complicated at the moment. And then the roles of chief state architect and chief city architect were introduced. And the process of legalizing illegally constructed buildings was brought into the sphere of spatial planning and included for the first time into the legislation regulating spatial development. So this law is the first time when we're dealing with this in the same law that deals with spatial planning and construction. These changes also created a great deal of turmoil in all areas of spatial regulation and development, and results of this, even after almost 4 years, are still difficult to fully comprehend. All of this is further complicated by the fact that this law kept some provisions of the former law until the adoption of General Regulatory Plan, which is not yet adopted. Since the adoption, the law was changed, amended 4 times, once technical correction, 3 times substantial changes, and so 2 times it was just changed in order to give more time to the local governments, again, to adopt the procedure to adopt their plans according to the law of 2008, which was attractive to some municipalities because they saw that once this law and these provisions kick in, they will not have the opportunity to do their plans by themselves. But again, because of everything that's been said here before, lack of expertise, lack of money, lack of funds, it was very difficult for municipalities to do this, and there was a push to extend this deadline. And it was extended a couple of times, but still some of the procedures for developing local level plans were stopped, and now they are just not being developed further until the adoption of the General Regulatory Plan. But also the fact that these dates, these deadlines were constantly shifting also contributed towards the perception of the new legislation as unreliable, because it was so easily debated and so easily sort of pushed around. Another big set of amendments that had 100 articles was adopted last summer. And actually, this was inspired by what I mentioned before about that kind of notion that the local governments could not charge utility costs for some investors and decide about that case-by-case basis. So Constitutional Court decided that this was actually unconstitutional, and that this was actually a potential corruptive mechanism. So now, because it stayed in the law until further notice, right, even though this is a new law, the amendments of 2020 brought this regulation in line with this constitutional ruling. But now they introduced, among other things, business zones in the local municipalities that were exempt from paying the utility provisions and on construction land. So with this kind of got another framework and another shape, but the trend of legislating spatial development to ease the regulations related to business development was continued with this. I said before, general regulatory plan was not yet adopted. It was supposed to be adopted within the 3 years of introducing this new law. This period was extended by 24 months. So now basically we can expect it in the late 2022. And because we already saw this deadline being pushed so many times, we can again expect it to be pushed even further. So this delay in adopting the general regulatory plan creates an impediment for the entire process, which is now subject to this series of transitional provisions and based on the expanding authority of the state government. One of the fiercely debated new additions is a newly adopted article added last summer, which gives the state government the authority to allow construction in locations which are presently not covered by the valid detailed plan documentation. And by doing this, effectively, the construction process is divorced from the process of spatial planning. So what we have is that very important decisions are left to be made ad hoc and on case-by-case basis, and outside of this framework of carefully crafted detailed spatial plan. To summarize all this, the numerous frequent changes in legislation have produced difficulties in implementing the legislation. The law of 2008 did not uphold the principles of polycentricity and decentralization. The amendments contributed to what we have now with the law of 2017. 2017 set out to solve the problem of inadequate municipal capacities, but basically they failed to consider how complicated the implementation of such a centralized system would be. By eliminating the existing classification of hierarchy of local and state level spatial plans, this new law established framework of developing spatial planning documents established a framework that is unknown to everyone and discontinued what was known. And here we are actually losing, and with this discontinuing with the tradition that was established during Yugoslavia and then continued with the experts that worked in both of these systems, big confusion basically was created. And right now we are still in this limbo and unsure what is going to happen next. In the period following the adoption of this law, the situation has not become much clearer at all, as you can see. And the result is that we now have construction projects popping up, and they're of dubious legality and quality, which inspires critical civic action, also on part of the initiatives that I'm part of. And I can tell you more about that via email or later in the discussion. All of this has been presented at length in a forthcoming chapter, which I wrote, The Volatile Policy Framework of Spatial Planning in Montenegro, Will the Center Hold? And this is coming out in an upcoming book, Governing Territorial Development in the Western Balkans. It's going to be published this summer, edited by Erblin Berisha, Giancarlo Cotella, and Alice Solly. So keep an eye out. It's a Springer edition, should be interesting for you if you're interested in this kind of thing. I saved this one last like afterthoughts to maybe also kind of inspire the discussion. This is a map I made a couple of years ago, and I just altered it for this presentation. You see how certain local governments started sort of being in opposition to the central government in Montenegro. So the central government in Montenegro changed politically for the first time after the breakup of Yugoslavia just last summer. And before that, only certain municipalities were kind of voting someone else into the local government. And there is an assumption, and this is my assumption, and it can be explored further, that seeing that certain municipalities, especially we can see here on the coast, so the wealthier municipalities of the coast were kind of electing a government that's different, that's in opposition to the central government. The central government decided to maybe do something about it and adopt instruments that will give it more power to govern spatial development in the entire country, even though the local municipalities are, changing their political orientation and maybe starting to think differently about the political economic development. Because if the local level cannot govern spatial development, really what is there to govern? So it's also interesting to think about these, how politics influences spatial planning and how it's all related. These are some of the references, and thank you so much for indulging me.